Well, we've got to this age,
Yes.
you know, you're 10, 11, 12, 13.
Yes.
This is the years we're talking about.
Yes.
And what you're telling me is what we would call in modern parlance, that you were realizing you were gay. Is that right?
Indeed.
I mean, that
Indeed.
is the nub of it.
Yes.
Were you as aware of it as I've just put it, or did you just explain those early feelings, how they manifested themselves for you?
I realized when I went to the School of Jurisprudence, which of course was completely filled with boys, that I had...
Was it a boarding school?
It was, yes.
Oh, so you were sent away from...
I was
hence
sent away
your
for a
mother
long time.
leaving in that carriage.
Indeed,
You
indeed.
clinging on
Yes,
to
yes.
the board behind, as she
Yes.
firmly
She
went
was going
ahead
to leave
saying...
me forever.
Yeah. Oh,
And I felt it was a prison sentence.
Oh.
And she said, go and play with the other boys, Piotr. Well, she little dreamed how faithfully I would follow her instructions. I began to feel very strong affections for some of the boys. There was a young boy called Sergei Kireev, only a year younger than I, for whom I developed something of an infatuation. And all the more so, I fear, because he treated me very, very cruelly. Once even slapped me in the face in front of all the other boys, which was a terrible humiliation, and I have to admit only added zest to my affection. A curious thing to learn about oneself at such a tender age, and what perverse creatures we humans are to love the thing that brings us pain. And Apuktin, who was much more in touch with his feelings and much more overt than I, taught me that I shouldn't be ashamed of my own nature. Now, I fear in this he was a little naive about the nature of the world, because this is a hangman world.
what do you mean by that?
Its pleasures are the pleasures of a hangman. Its pleasures are the pleasures of an inquisition. It's a sour, sadistic world that loves to hate and judge and punish. And in that world, someone who is different is reviled and needs to be punished.
And did you and your friends talk about this, or was much of this happening in your head?
I was aware of it, and Apuktin, who was very, very open about his sexuality, said,
and this is a
"Don't
boy of
be
14, 15.
Yes, he said, don't be afraid of it, Piotr."
What did the teachers think?
Well, I think they thought, and I thought so too, that it was a youthful fad that would one day blow away on the wind.
You were going through a phase.
Yes, a
Boys
phase.
go through this phase.
Of course, and you know, I think people were a little more freely emotional with each other in those days, boys in particular. But I was also aware that regardless of the fact that it felt natural, it could also very easily be reviled. There were some injunctions against it at the school, which were often ignored. And curiously, it was accepted amongst the aristocracy in Russia. But how could it not be? If it wasn't, you'd have to arrest 2/3 of Russia's oligarchy. But for ordinary men, such as myself, it was punishable by public disgrace, the loss of civil rights, and exile to Siberia. So it was not an idle threat.
Known active homosexuality.
Yes.
Punishable, say it again?
By public disgrace, loss of civil rights, and exile to Siberia.
Wow. So
This
you could be
terrified me.
arrested,
Yes,
tried in some way, shape or form.
and sent to Siberia.
So, my
It was
goodness.
very, very frightening, and I felt this at school. I think perhaps the first time I really felt the danger of my own nature was when I was having dinner at the Chateauton restaurant in St Petersburg with Apuktin and a few sympathetic friends, when suddenly, in the middle of the supper, a man stood up in the restaurant and stridently denounced us for our habits, hurling all sorts of epithets and slurs at us.
And you're teenagers still, are you?
We were
at this time?
teenagers, and the next day our names were published across the city in connection with that ugly French word bougre, buggers. And it was then that I realized that my nature was a peril to me, that like a spider I could be reviled for being what I am.
And that is why, for the rest of your life, you suppressed in public this
As much
side of
as
your
I could.
nature.
Yes.
Except there was a freedom with certain friends.
It was a freedom with certain friends and a freedom in certain places. There was a very dear friend of mine called Prince Mashevsky, and he called himself Prince of Sodom and Citizen of Gomorrah. You can imagine that things were a little freer with him. But for myself, I was always terribly frightened, and I wanted to be dignified, and I wanted to be respectable. And I eventually found ways to try to suppress this thought. I mean, we're jumping ahead, but I attempted to get married once.
Oh, well, we're going to hear about that in a moment.
Terrible disaster.
Tell me about some of the girls that you met and that you liked and that you thought, well, this is what everybody else does. Maybe I'm going to give this a go.
Well, all right. I'll start this another way, if I may. After the conservatoire, I was invited to Moscow by Anton Rubinstein's brother, Nikolai Rubinstein, who asked me to be a professor of music, which was extraordinary.
You're now in your early 20s.
I finished the conservatoire mere seconds ago, and suddenly I was being requisitioned as a professor. I had nothing to profess. I accepted. But unfortunately, teaching turned out to be a sort of wearisome vexation. There was endless rounds of tutorial drudgery. It kept me from my own composing, and I was constantly surrounded by crowds of adoring women. They loved me, and it horrified me. I have to say, I was always afraid. I was terrified at the sight of so many crinolines and petticoats.
What did you look like? Because the pictures I have of you, they're photographs, aren't they, taken later life?
Yeah.
You're covered in beard.
Yes, that's right.
What were you looking like when you were in your
I was
early
growing
20s?
my beard to hide a rather weak chin, but I think I was quite handsome, if I may say so. I had rather sensuous lips and penetrating blue eyes. Slowly the hair retreated from the back of my head, alas, and exposed my forehead to the world. But at that time, I think I was rather interesting to the young ladies. I, of course, had no interest in the young ladies and was terribly confused. And all the time, these darker passions would rear their irresistible head, and I surrendered to them. But every time I surrendered, I felt a terrible sense of guilt. And I would go to the church and kneel and pray to God. And I would say,
had faith been part of your family's
always,
upbringing?
yes, always.
And
and I am very, very faithful. And I would kneel to God, and I would say, "Let me be as other men, O Lord. Take away this thing in me, and let me walk freely in the world with my hand in the hand of my beloved." But my prayers were never answered.